Thank you, guys. Hi, everyone. How's it going? Good. Okay, so we are going to be in two different places. So what I want you guys to do is go to 1 Timothy chapter 4. And while you're flipping, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the sermon series that we're starting. So this new sermon series that we're starting is called Spiritual Disciplines. Can you guys say that, spiritual disciplines? Okay, perfect. We're like half of the way there. So it's called Spiritual Disciplines. And tonight, you and I are going to talk about what it looks like. What are spiritual disciplines? What are the purpose of spiritual disciplines? Why do they do them? Why do we do them? Why do they get us somewhere? And so if you ever have asked your breakout leader or your mom, why do I need to read my Bible? Why do I need to pray? Why do I need to go to church on Sunday? Why do I need to pay attention in worship? Why do I need to listen to a sermon? Tonight is the answer to that question. These spiritual disciplines are kind of just a means to get us somewhere else. So we're going to be in 1 Timothy chapter 4. And the way I like to explain 1 Timothy is imagine you are like these early apostles that are going and they're spreading the gospel to people, right? Like you're Timothy. And your breakout leader is writing you a letter before you leave. They're writing you a letter, or when you're there, they're writing you a letter and telling you all the things that it means to be a good Christian, what it looks like to walk with Jesus daily. And that's what Paul does for Timothy. Paul was like Timothy's breakout leader. And so he writes this letter to Timothy and says, hey, like if you are following Jesus and you want to help other people follow Jesus, you can do it like this. And then writes a couple of letters. And so we're going to be in 1 Timothy chapter 4. We're going to start at verse 6, and we're going to kind of go through verse 8. And that's where we're going to learn what are the spiritual disciplines, what do they mean, what does it mean to discipline. We're also going to learn a little bit about where it's getting us. So 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 6. If you point these things out to the brothers and sisters, you will be a good minister of Christ Jesus, nourished on the truths of the faith and of good teaching that you followed. Have nothing to do with godlessness and wise tales. If you have a pen or a highlighter or a pencil, I want you to highlight towards the end. Rather, train yourself to be godly. For physical training is of some value, but godliness, circle, underline, dot around godliness, has value for all things, holding promise for both the present life and the life to come. Rather, train yourself to be godly. For physical training is of some value, but godliness has value for all things. So, if we're asking ourselves, like, what are the spiritual disciplines? The spiritual disciplines are how we do what Paul is saying right here. Train ourselves to be godly. Or another word I'll use interchangeably tonight is kind of like godliness. Spiritual disciplines are how we train ourselves to be godly or attain or seek godliness, to be like God and to be more like him. And so we're going to talk about that in two different ways tonight. But I kind of wanted to explain what it looks like to train yourself. So the way that he's talking about training yourselves, he even says like physical training. So do you guys like know like bodybuilders and stuff, like bodybuilders, MMA fighters, UFC fighters, like all of that? Like what do they have to do every day? What do they have to do every day? They have to train, okay? Because they're not going to wake up one day and be super buff, are they? No, they have to train. And so what are the ways that some of them might train? Weightlifting, something else. Say that again? They run, okay. They're doing active things. What about like maybe the things that they eat? Yeah, okay. Yeah, their sleep. Like they're doing things to train to get somewhere, right? So I did a little research on bodybuilders. A bodybuilder, on average, goes to the gym for 5 hours a day. Is there anybody in here that goes to the gym for 5 hours a day? No, I was about to say, no way are you in the gym for 5 hours a day. Okay, so they're at the gym for 5 hours a day. Do you want to guess how long a normal person goes to the gym? Somebody said it, 45 minutes, okay? Normal people go for 45 minutes on average daily. A bodybuilder goes 5 times a day, or 5 hours a day, but how does he train up to that? He works. He goes daily, consecutively, over and over and over again, he goes. I also learned about protein. I learned a lot about protein. Normally, you and I, like a normal human being, will eat about 60 grams of protein. I think it's grams. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry. It's 60 grams of protein, okay? That's like normal. To quantify that for you guys, to help you understand what that looks like, it's 25 chicken nuggets. 25 chicken nuggets is the amount of protein that you and I will need in a normal day. Do you guys want to guess how many chicken nuggets to get enough protein for a bodybuilder he needs? 100 what? Wow, that's actually really close. It's 170. He has to eat 170 chicken nuggets. And I know everybody in this room is like, I could do that. You cannot do that. It will make you violently ill if you do not eat chicken nuggets over. If you don't eat that much protein every single day, it's going to hurt you. You have to train up to it. And so if godliness is where we're going, that means that spiritual disciplines are the means to get us there. So if godliness, the thing we're going to talk about tonight, godliness is where we're going, that means that the spiritual disciplines are the means to get us there. And so what is godliness? If we are going to talk about godliness in two different ways. So godliness, the first one, is being closer to God. Godliness is being closer to God. And then we'll talk again. We'll say that godliness is looking more like God. But I want you guys to write this down. The spiritual disciplines, what they are, the spiritual disciplines are practices. Practices, they're things that we do that bring us closer to God and help make us more like God. Hey, make us look more like God, really. They're practices that bring us closer to God and things that make us look more like God. And so we're going to be in, if you have your Bibles, now that they're open, you can flip them to 2 Corinthians chapter 3. We're going to be in verse 16. And so again, we talk a lot about these letters, and the 2 Corinthians is another letter. It's another letter to the church of Christians, of believers that Paul writes. And so he's going to tell them something about what just knowing God looks like, what it looks like to be a follower of God. And when you know God, the way that we get to live, the way that you and I will get to walk in and towards godliness. Are you guys with me? Okay, cool. So, point one, godliness is what brings us, or spiritual disciplines is what brings us closer to God. That's part of godliness. It brings us closer to God. We're going to be in verse 16. But when one turns to the Lord and the veil is removed, now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And we all, with unveiled face, beholding the glory of God. So what I really want you guys to focus on here, if you're underlining anything about bringing us closer to God, you can underline the fact that the veil is removed. Okay, so I'm going to have to give you a short history lesson here, so I need you guys to make sure that you're awake and listening and taking notes so that you understand what I'm talking about. So this veil is something that is extremely important in Jewish culture. So I actually have a picture of what their temple would look like. Can you guys put that up? Okay, so this is the temple of God. When people would go and worship God, remember how I was talking a little bit earlier about sacrifices? This is where they would bring these sacrifices, right? And you guys see that purple like curtain in the middle? That purple curtain did something super important. See, on the other side of the purple curtain where people wouldn't be was called the holiest of holies. Can you guys say that? The holiest of holies. And essentially, like, that is where God dwelled. The presence of God was there, and people weren't allowed to walk into it. Because you and I, because of sin, we're separated from God, so we're not allowed to walk into the holiest of holies. And so what did the veil do? It separated it. It separated it so on one side, people would stand, and on the other side would be the presence of God. And that is so important because he says here, but when one turns to the Lord, the veil is removed. The veil is removed. And it's not going to be up on the screens, but in Luke 23, it talked about the day that Jesus dies. And it says, the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was torn in two. And that is a really big deal. That veil that separated the holiest of holies and everybody else, that essentially separated God and everybody that wasn't clean, now is ripped apart, and God's people can dwell with God freely. God's people can dwell with God freely. And so, what does that mean? Jesus lifting the veil allows you and I, by his death, him lifting the veil, allows you and I to do something called beholding. Can you guys say beholding? Beholding. Beholding really just means to see, to know, and to understand someone. So sometimes, specifically, someone or something remarkable, someone or something amazing. And so because of Jesus, you and I get to have a relationship with God that nobody else ever got to have before. They got to be with God through a veil, but you and I get to be with God face to face when we sit down to pray or we sit down to read our Bible. We get to spend time with the Spirit of God. There's this show that I like to watch. It's called Love is Blind. If you know me, I love reality TV. It's a fatal flaw. But I love Love is Blind. And the premise of it is that there are two people, and what they do is they date through a wall. So they never see this person the entire time they're dating. But they get to know each other. They get to hear about their families. They get to hear about their jobs. They get to know every part of them, but they don't get to see each other. And then at the end of the episode, normally there's this moment where the two people get to meet. And, it's reality TV, so it's super dramatic. And, there's this big old sheet, and they drop the sheet, and they run towards each other, and they embrace, and they're like, this is amazing. Imagine every morning that you sit down at your word. Every morning that you go to pray. Every afternoon when you get home from school and you decide to spend some time with God. It's like that reveal over and over and over again because the veil was dropped. The veil was dropped. It was torn in two. And because of that, you get to have a relationship with God that is unlike any other. You get to be brought closer to God through the spiritual disciplines. But I think one of the interesting things is like God is always there. His relationship never ends if you know him. And so it's kind of like, imagine someone new comes to your school and you're like, man, I really, really like that girl, or I really, really like that guy. And then your teacher comes up to you and is like, hey, you can pick to have every class with them. You can pick for them to be your biology partner. You can pick to have their lunch all the way until senior year. You can pick to do everything with them. You can have your lockers next to each other. You can sit at lunch together. You can do everything together, but you have to choose to do that. You have to choose to do that. In the same way, God is sitting and he's waiting for you to come to him. He's saying, man, I really want to hear from my friend today. I really want to hear from my daughter today. But we have this choice to let our Bible sit and collect dust, or to chase to be closer to him. As part of these spiritual disciplines is that it brings us closer to him. They're the means to godliness, and part of godliness is to bring us closer to God. This God that you know, but now you get to spend time with in an even deeper way. That's point one. They bring us closer to God. And then point two, they help make us look more like God. And That's verse 18. If you'll keep reading with me, help make us look more like God. And we all, with unveiled face, beholding the glory of God, are being transformed, and you can underline here, transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit, being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. Now, if you know Jesus for who he is, like if you were a follower of Jesus, if there was a day where you decided to give your life to him, for the rest of your life, you're going to walk on this path called sanctification. Can you say that word with me? Sanctification. And that word sanctification purely means to look more like Jesus, to be transformed, like this verse says, transformed into the same image. And essentially the best way to say this is like the way that I am today should look more like Jesus than who I was yesterday. And who I am tomorrow should look more like Jesus than who I am today. And the day after that, and the day after that, and the day after that, every day that I live and breathe on earth until I go to heaven, I should fight to look more and more and more like Jesus. That is what it means to be transformed from one degree of glory to the next. It's to be in this process of sanctification or sanctified by him. And that's the cool thing about the spiritual disciplines, is it helps us get there. And what I don't want you guys to hear me say is that there's any way you could be fully like Jesus on this side of earth. It's not going to happen. There's no way we're going to be sinless and faultless until we get to heaven with God. But what I am saying is that you have a command to look more like him every single day. And the only thing that's going to help you get there is the spiritual disciplines, is spending time with him. It's like, how are you supposed to look like someone that you don't know? How are you supposed to look like someone you don't spend time with? If you know anything about me, I have an older brother. I have multiple older brothers. You can throw it up there. So this is me and all my older brothers. The one on the end with the Ohio State sweatshirt, shirt, that is one of my older brothers. His name is Dwayne. And Dwayne and I are like literally best friends. I'm not going to say that I have favorites, because I don't have favorites, because they might watch this. But I love Dwayne, okay? I do. I spend a lot of time with him, and I spent a lot of time with him growing up. See, me and Dwayne have about a 13-year age difference, okay? So when I was born, he was like my buddy. Our family worked on a buddy system. Like, if you're going anywhere, you're going with your buddy. In the morning, you and your buddy better be ready for school. So when he was my buddy, I looked like this. That is me and my buddy, okay? My buddy and I did everything together. And my mom would always say, like, man, you're turning into your buddy. Like when Dwayne eventually moved out and I was still in school, or still in my house with my mom and my dad and my other brother, we would always have these conversations, and my mom would be like, oh, you sound like Dwayne. Or like, oh, you kind of look like Dwayne. Or she would call us the wrong things. Like, I spent so much time with Dwayne looking at him and looking up to him that I started to become like him. Now, what if the people in your school said the same thing about you? What if you spent so much time reading your word that when you walked into Hope next week, someone was like, man, like that person, like, they just kind of like act like Jesus. Like everything they do is kind of just like what Jesus did in the Bible. Like they're filled with love and they're filled with joy. They're kind. The more that you spend time with him, the more you can look more like him. Or what if, you're talking to your mom or to your dad and they're like, it's just like the last couple of weeks, you've just been different. You've just had so much joy. And you've just been so patient with your siblings. And you've just been so respectful to us. Like you look different. You look more like Jesus. But again, how are you going to look like someone that you're not spending time with? And if you know him, then godliness is the goal, remember? The goal is to look more like him and to be closer to him. And so you want to work towards these things, but the only way you're going to be able to do that is through the spiritual disciplines. I like to think about it like this. The word Christian literally means little Christs. Little Christs. What if the people in your life was like, man, that is a little Christ? He, she, they act just like Jesus. I mean, I don't want to act like Mia because Mia is sinful and she's broken and she's wrong all the time. I want to look like Jesus. But the only way I'm going to get to that level of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, the only way that I'll ever get there is through the spiritual disciplines, through these practices. And so, if spiritual disciplines are the practices that bring us closer to God and make us look more like God, we're going to talk a little bit more throughout the next couple of weeks about these spiritual disciplines, what they do. You're going to hear some pro tips. But before we wrap up, I want to give you guys my pro tip. Remember how I was talking about the bodybuilder and all the chicken nuggets that they eat and how all of that protein would make you and I, normal people, sick? And how they worked up to that? The way that they got there was consistency. They were consistent. See, this godliness thing happens when we pursue godliness. Like, all of this will happen when we pursue godliness and pursue it consistently. Consistency means over and over again, like every single day. It happens when we pursue it consistently. And so the pro tip is that the power of daily consistency, the power of sitting down with God every single day, over and over and over again, the power of practicing these spiritual disciplines will drive you way further than a week of passionate moments at camp. They'll drive you way further to godliness than a week of passionate moments at camp, as badly as I want you guys all to go. They'll take you way further than a couple good Radiate nights where you talked in your breakout. Even though you should, it's part of the spiritual discipline, surprise, surprise. But it'll take you way further than a couple of worship services. It'll take you way further than a couple of Sunday mornings. Spending time and having a relationship with God is way different than just showing up on Sunday morning. It's the power of consistency. I want to close with this. Jake was telling me the story about these hikers, and they're essentially trying to get up this mountain through this winter storm, and there are two groups. One group decides, you know what, every single day we'll wake up, we'll hike the same amount, and we'll get there when we get there. We'll be consistent. The other group decides, you know what, we'll only hike when the conditions are perfect. When the conditions are perfect. And then, also, we'll hike as much as we possibly can that day, and then we'll stop. See, the people in group one, they got there, and their entire group got there safely, but the people in group two, most of their group died. They didn't make it. They had no consistency. And for you and I, God is saying, like, hey, if you're striving for godliness, if you know me, and you're saying, like, hey, I'm striving to look more like you and to spend more time with you, I'm striving for that, I want that, he's saying, do it every day. Don't just choose the days when, like, you know, I got home from school early, like, I might have enough time to, like, read maybe a chapter or maybe a verse. Don't wait for the days where you're like, oh, well, you know, all my friends are reading this, so now I have to. He's saying, like, come Spend time with me every day and watch how you walk that path of consistency. As I was studying, Scripture says that we are meant to devote ourselves to godliness. This word devotion essentially means to dedicate yourself. It's what discipline looks like, to dedicate yourself. So, my friends, my challenge for you is that since spiritual disciplines are practices that bring us closer to God and make us more like God, my challenge for you as we go through this month, and as some of my friends come and they talk more about spiritual disciplines, will you talk to your leader and will you start reading a book of the Bible today? Like, if it takes you this entire month just to get through like John or Mark or Luke, do it. Be consistent about it. Read something every single day. And from this day to that day, as you walk in consistency, as you walk daily with God in spiritual disciplines, I want you to watch as God makes you look more like him to the people around you. And also, as you start to have those moments where you're like, man, there were moments where I felt so far from God, but in this moment right here, right now, I feel closer to God than ever. Will you dedicate yourself? Will you devote yourself to the spiritual disciplines throughout this month? Radiate, will you pray with me? Lord, I'm so thankful